Hey guys, welcome to What to Read. I'm here rocking my Brown University shirt. Go June Carroll. Rocking for my sister, my older sister, June. I got this when I went and did an event at Brown, so I got it working. So I love it. I love this sweatshirt. Jason, this is a cool sweatshirt. You have to admit it. I've rocked my Montbello Warriors high school gear. I'm now rocking this. Haven't yet rocked the Harvard. We'll think about that. I have to think about that. I have a lot of complicated issues with the school. We are about, let's say, 2.5, weeks in to the George Floyd protests, which are actually not dying down even after the indictment of the police officers, all 4 police officers. Still no indictments in the Breonna Taylor case in Louisville. There's now been an Atlanta shooting. A young man shot in the back as he was running away from police. It just goes on and on and on. This doesn't seem to be slowing down at all. We've had Confederate monuments taken down all over the country, people knocking down Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee lost the war once, and he's losing the war again. Because apparently a lot of public officials saying, you know what, let's just keep him down. But why take him? I actually think what they should do with all these monuments to the losers in the Civil War, the people who were traitors and treasonous villains who took up arms against the United States, so they
put them in the Trump Library. They can go to the Trump Library.
They can put them in the Trump Library. That is one place, because he does seem to love the Confederacy. It's a weird thing. Donald Trump doesn't seem to love anybody, but he does seem to really love the Confederacy. He's really into the Confederacy. He thinks it's great. And it is weird for the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces to be siding with the rebel army that fought the United States. It's a strange thing.
He's a treasonous bastard.
Well, he likes the Confederacy. He's for them. He's against the American. He spoke at West Point. Now, I have to say, I took a mental health weekend, so I was out at work when he did his little speech, but big ups to the AM Joy crew, because they carried on. Eamon Mohedin filled in for me, but he did this speech at West Point, and he made all of the West Point graduates come back to West Point and line up, no social distancing, so he could give a speech that, of course, turned into a TV commercial. He made it into a commercial. He then cut this video. It was all about him being able to use yet another set of troops for his own aggrandizement to make himself look like a big shot. It's becoming almost like a psychological study in narcissism. He uses the troops like they're like game pieces on a chessboard. It's bizarre. And, of course, Mark Milley, who is the Joint Chiefs of Staff chair, apologized for having allowed himself to be used in the little stunt where Donald Trump had the park police and all whatever federales that he marshaled together, and the National Guard fly over and hover over troops and hover over the marchers, and they got pepper sprayed and tear gas.
Do you think Milley would have apologized if the other generals and former generals didn't say anything? Because I'm sure he thought about it when he walked out there in his fatigues with the defense secretary. I mean, you think he really feels sorry he did that?
I think that Mark Milley, General Milley, I think he apologized because he was responding to the absolute outrage and disgust that other generals, like a half a dozen, high-ranking military men, including the former Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, but that's my point. Do you think he would have said anything if they didn't say anything? Because obviously he walked out there, so he should have known that was coming.
And he knew it was better. So the reporting on it, including from NBC News, is that the reason that he and others went along with it, the Defense Secretary and himself supposedly went along with it because they were trying to prevent Donald Trump from instigating the Insurrection Act against the protesters, and so this was their way of appeasing him. They're always appeasing him. There's always appeasement going on with Donald Trump, and that they were appeasing him, trying to get him to back down off the idea of using the Insurrection Act and sending literal armed U.S. troops into American cities without the permission of the governors. That's the supposed reason why they did it. But what they did was shameful. The United States military is not supposed to be a partisan instrument, and they've allowed themselves to be used and corrupted. And you had a lot of generals, including Donald Trump's former defense secretary and others, come out and say this was wrong. Colin Powell came out and condemned it. A bunch of people came out and condemned it. Even Mark Kelly, who's not exactly a good guy. Mark Kelly is still the guy who lied about a congresswoman,
Frederica Wilson,
we know very well from Florida, lied about her, called her an empty cattle hat or something. Empty barrel. You know, he is not a good man, and who sits on the board of an entity that's snatching migrant children. So he's not exactly a good guy. Let's just be honest here. We're not praising Mark Kelly, but even he came out, General Kelly. We're not exactly giving him praise. Okay, let's just be real. Lots of news that's happening on the day that we're recording this. The Supreme Court has come out, and very surprising, a 6-3 ruling in favor of the LGBTQ community, saying that it is in fact illegal to fire somebody because they are lesbian, trans, or gay, which is a big deal, particularly who voted on that side. So voting with the liberals this time is not just John Roberts, who you definitely get the sense that John Roberts is a save the reputation of the court guy, that whatever his feelings, his personal feelings are about issues, he tries to do things to save the reputation of the court and not let it go down in Trumpy madness. So he voted with the liberals. That doesn't surprise me that much. What surprised me was Gorsuch. Donald Trump's first appointee, the first feather in his cap to the far right was Gorsuch. Was the Gorsuch nomination to the Supreme Court went through. People were like, "Oh, this is going to be bad." He voted with them, and not only did he vote with the liberals on this, he actually wrote the decision. And he said that in his decision, he wrote that just because the people who wrote the Civil Rights Act and Title VII, I believe it is, of the Civil Rights Act, which says you can't discriminate on the basis of gender, just because they didn't anticipate that it would also be gender identity and it would also be, with sexual orientation, just because they didn't anticipate that doesn't mean that it doesn't apply, which is shocking to me. I have to be honest. I'm not surprised by the three who voted the other side: Alito, Silent Clarence, and Crying Kavanaugh.
But most of those guys are just pure political. I always thought Kavanaugh's political. A lot of them are political, but I just really think some of them think about history and do not want to be on the wrong side of history.
Right, and I think some of them, right. I think I'm not one who believes that the courts are nonpartisan. I think the courts are very partisan, and particularly this court. And the court that did Bush v. Gore, like they have partisan leanings just like anybody else. But I agree, Jason, that there are times when they stand up for the reputation of the court. But Gorsuch might actually be one of those surprising ones. A lot of people are on the Twitters talking about the fact that when he was nominated, a lot of former people who had clerked for him said he's not as far right as he might seem.
I believe he just wanted the Supreme Court seat, so he did what he had to do to get on. I don't know. Maybe I could be wrong.
I don't know. He could be. I mean, he could go the wrong way on the Affordable Care Act. Okay,
exactly.
So this could all go bad. I'm not
just
ready to start praising him yet.
Yeah,
but I'm gonna give him a high five. Let's give him an applause. Let's get an applause from him. He deserves applause. On this day, I applaud Gorsuch, and I think you should too. So that was good. But what's happening is that Trump, while he is digging in deeper with the Republican Party, they still can't seem to let this guy go, even as he's humiliating them on a daily basis. Other institutions in this country are starting to finally fight back. The military is saying, nah, bruh, you can't use us as your plaything. The leadership of the military is saying, nah, bruh. You're seeing sometimes the courts say, nah, not going to do that. And so you're seeing that there are some limits being set on him, which is going to enrage him a lot. There was also a decision today by the FDA, which is under his administration, saying, the whole hydroxychloroquine thing, nah, we're going to remove our emergency authorization for it.
The fairy dust is wearing off.
I think, and what I see is, and even in the behavior of his administration, what I see is a sense of the regime is crumbling at behavior.
Everybody's trying to save themselves now.
Everyone's trying to rush for the exit, and they're figuring how do we dismount? And that's the question, is how do we dismount? And I think you're starting to see it now. But for Donald Trump himself, I can only begin to imagine what his psychological state is today when one of the people he put on the court, one of his bragging rights is having put far right wingers on the court. And one of his appointees done ruled the other way from his evangelical base. And he can't be in a good state of mind today between that and the hydroxychloroquine because he can't take his crazy pills.
I guarantee he starts throwing shade at him by tomorrow.
By tomorrow? What?
Well,
the tweet at Gorsuch.
I think he has to save a little face first.
I think the tweet at Gorsuch is already composed. It's a question of when he drops it. And
Amen.
not only that, but the far right is going to lose their minds. They're going to lose their minds because they're going to see yet another far-right appointee who turned out to be, not as far-right necessarily all the time.
Another one up for civility.
We'll see what happens. So we will see what happens. We're going to wait for it. But I think Donald Trump's state of mind is always a thing that we have to focus on because there's weird stuff happening, right? He can't navigate a ramp, apparently. He uses two hands to drink water. There's things about his psychology that are kind of overt, and also his neurological state, all of his state. And I think these are legitimate questions, even journalistically, to start asking, what is going on with this guy? What is happening? What is going on with him? And I think we do have to ask it. And we have the perfect person to at least dive into the psychology of who he is. Because watching Trump for now almost 4 full years, almost 5 if you count the election, you start to get a sense that there's something just ain't right. Oh, something just damn right. Keith Sweat said it. Something ain't right. We're going to talk to one of the people that I've been just dying to talk to for quite a long time. He wrote another book that is classic. You must read it, called Bush on the Couch. He's also now analyzed Trump, and this is going to be good. Let's bring him in. And joining me now is somebody I am very excited to talk with, Justin A. Frank, MD. You will know him from the New York Times best-selling book, Bush on the Couch, and he has now done one on Trump. It's called Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President. Here's the cover for you guys to look at. It is heavily well-reviewed, very well-reviewed. I'm very excited. I've been wanting to talk with you for a long time. Justin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here, Joy. Very nice.
So I have to start by asking.
In fact, I think I should be interviewing you.
Well, thank you very much. I might need
about
Joy
your
help
book. About your book.
There you go.
The Man Who Sold America. I think we need to do a session on that book. I loved it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Hey, a little reverse what to read. Hey, a little promo.
It was great. It was great.
Well, let me let you get a little critique, because I am not, obviously, a psychiatrist. I am not an expert as you are. But my take on Trump's psychology is that he's possessed with both a narcissism, probably a narcissistic personality disorder, but that he also is kind of afraid of being isolated and unloved. Is that anywhere close to what he is?
I think that's very close to what he is. He is definitely afraid of being unloved. And in fact, that's one of the core points in my book, which is that I have a chapter on lying and why he lies so much. And that one of the sources of lying, actually, which is a hard thing to accept, I think, is that people who lie like that have usually felt lied to when they were little. So my thought is that he may have felt lied to when his parents told him they loved him. Mm-hmm. So he lies to all of us regularly and has always lied.
Let me read a little piece of your book, and this is a part where you're talking about the way he tormented the people of Puerto Rico, and you write, due in part to the narcissistic self-regard he developed in response to his demanding father and unsupportive mother, Donald grew up especially challenged by the prospect of having to accept and internalize those parts of himself that he viewed as unacceptable, particularly anything that suggests weakness, dependency, or other traits that don't fit his omnipotent self-image. You know, it's interesting that part, Tony Schwartz, who I got to know in writing my book, and also got to know when we did Bill Maher together a couple of times. And he would always say this. He would say he met the parents, when they were still alive, and that Donald Trump's father was just this harsh, cold, ice cold man, but that the mother was too. The mother was just icy. That she didn't come across as like a loving person, and that he always felt that they were a lot of the reason that Donald Trump is the way he is. Do you agree?
I agree completely. They're a major part of the reason, and it's ironic because there are some qualities that he has which are completely discarded from his personality for years, that really, if he had different parents, I think he would have turned out very differently. First of all, they would have diagnosed the fact that he couldn't read. And secondly, they would have been loving to him and holding him. I can't imagine his mother ever sitting him on her lap and holding him. And in fact, one of the core parts of my book is about the fact that he had an absent mother. And when you have an absent mother, it affects you very deeply because he doesn't know how to mother others. He doesn't have that kind of sense of empathy that a mother has, because what a mother has when she holds her baby is she gives the baby a sense of being contained, connected, and understood, even pre-verbally. They know when the baby's hungry, so they nurse the baby, or when he's wet, or when he whatever. And I have felt there was none of that for him growing up, no equivalent of that. And so a lot of the issues do have to do with his mother. In fact, somebody pointed out to him after he was president for about 4 months that there was only a picture of his father in the Oval Office, and he didn't even have a picture of his mother.
Interesting.
And he's very much unlike his mother, although if you look at her picture,
they look alike.
They look alike. And
just like
the hairdo is even alike. It's really sort of, it's fabulous to look at. It's amazing. And then as far as the father was much more of a stern disciplinarian who I will use the word tyrannical. He was like a tyrant. He insisted on everything being at a certain time in a certain way, and the kids behaving in a certain way. And so he was very frightening. So I think that he was never felt safe to be vulnerable. So what a person does when they don't feel safe to be vulnerable, they develop contempt for other people who are vulnerable. It's called a defensive use of contempt. So they see vulnerability in other people, and they want to remind themselves that they're invulnerable, but the other people are vulnerable. So he treats the people from Puerto Rico in a terribly cruel way, and also, just tossing them those paper towels. It's really a sense of contempt for their needs. And that's really a disavowed self-contempt that he puts into other people.
Yeah, he definitely seems like that. I always say he reminds me of the child king in the first part of Game of Thrones, and like that where the young man, I'm gonna forget his name. He's really a Lannister.
Can't help you there.
But yeah, he's like the young Baratheon. He's the young King Baratheon. He reminds me of him. Joffrey Baratheon. See, I'm going to remember it. Joffrey Baratheon. Trump reminds me of him. He's very similar to that character. If you ever want to watch Game of Thrones, he will remind you of him. You breezed past a certain thing you said there, and I want to go back to it. You said that Trump can't read?
Right. Trump had dyslexia as a child, and so he barely is able to read. He can read big print and a teleprompter and read very slowly. But the reason he doesn't read briefings, and he seems so impatient with presidential briefings and facts, he has trouble reading. And so they've tried different methods to help him, but because of his difficulty, he became impatient. So he made assumptions. What people who have dyslexia do is they finish sentences before they read them all, because they can't wait. So they make mistakes. They don't even know what the sentence is about. Wow. And that affects not only reading, it affects your vocabulary, and it affects your ability to listen. So you have to make yourself listen, because otherwise you metabolize things so fast that you do it incorrectly. And so he is impatient and can't really learn that way.
Yeah.
Yes, he's dyslexic.
It's fascinating. Every page of this book, Trump on the Couch, is fascinating. You talk about his lies, which is sort of the signal thing about Donald Trump, is he constantly lies, but he calls actual real news fake news because he doesn't like it. And you're right, the longer he lies, the more difficult it is for Trump to see the world itself as real. In this respect, there is at least some relative truth in his catch-all characterization of unwanted information as fake news, much of which simply doesn't comport with his fixed belief system, and thus on one level is experienced as fake, or at least unreal. And news itself is threatening because new knowledge poses a threat to his fixed ideas. as you said, intelligence briefings, et cetera, are just hard to understand, but a danger to his psychic equilibrium. Do you get the sense that Donald Trump believes his own lies, that he's enveloped himself in them, that he's decided that what he thinks is true is true? Like, for instance, when he says, I'm going to take hydroxyquinone, and then the FDA says, no, that's not safe.
I think sometimes he believes what he's saying. One of the things that Tony Schwartz mentioned in the book, the first book, that Trump quoted him, maybe, I don't know, he gave him the term or not, but Trump talked about truthful hyperbole. That was how he talked about his lying, that he always believed as a salesman in truthful hyperbole. Now, to me, hyperbole, it means exaggeration, but it's also lying. So there's a paradox even in the term truthful hyperbole. And Trump has always lied. And when he talks about fake news, the other thing I talk about in the book, and that's become very clear, and people are now using the word even all the time, Nancy Pelosi does and others, is projection. And projection is attributing a disavowed quality that you have that you don't like to someone else, or accusing someone of something you do, and then you really believe it. So when he says fake news, he's talking about himself. He is saying, whatever I tell you is a lie. So when he calls the news fake news, he is projecting his own lying.
Wow. When
he calls the press the enemy of the people, that's very disturbing to do, because it means that at some level he knows he is the enemy of the people. He is the enemy of the American people, and he knows it. So when he's hugging the flag, it's compensatory. It's not genuine, because he knows that at a deep level, he doesn't like anything that has to do with the past. He doesn't like fathers. He doesn't like founding fathers. He doesn't like the history of America. He is constantly saying he was a better president. You even mentioned this in your book, I think, that he was a better president than any other president. And he has contempt for every person.
Yeah.
And it has to do with his defensive relationship to his father, who was a frightening man, who was the one person who scared him all the time, who he always felt he had to lie to because he was afraid of being discovered.
Okay, so let's talk about the family just a little bit, Justin. The Trump family all seem to be very similar to Donald Trump. There were stories about his sister potentially also, participating in some of the tax weirdness with the father's estate. Obviously, the father allegedly didn't pay his taxes. But there's one family member who is coming out now with a book named Mary Trump, and she is Donald Trump's niece. She's the daughter of his oldest brother, who apparently drank himself to death. He was not what the father wanted him to be. He wanted to be a pilot, not a real estate tycoon. He was ridiculed and belittled and mistreated by the dad, apparently, and by Donald Trump. And now his daughter is coming out with a book. Does it surprise you that there are not more members of that family that are coming out and talking about the family dynamic?
I think it's surprising that this person is coming out with a book rather than the other way around, because people are afraid of Donald Trump. Yeah. Everybody in the family is afraid of him, including even his older sisters. And he's a scary man.
Yeah.
I think Mary Trump, who is his niece, is named for Donald Trump's mother, who was Mary Trump. So she's got the family name, and Mary Trump's father was Donald Trump's older brother, who has the father's name. Donald always envied his brother and wished he were named Fred Trump Jr. because he wanted his father's name. So he always envied his older brother. But the other issue with that is that the older brother did not just reject working for his father. He actually didn't reject the real estate business straight away. He did some of it, but he did it with more honesty and wasn't cutting corners. And that made the father, Fred Trump Sr., angry. The second thing was he was really disillusioned when he learned that his father was doing illegal and dishonest things and refusing to rent to African Americans. And by then, he was really out of the business. And he was very disappointed and disillusioned in his father. And in fact, so much so that his father, who was known as an anti-Semite, because the father lied about where he was from and said he was not from Germany, but he was from Sweden. The son, Fred Jr., joined a Jewish fraternity in college. Now, that's pretty defiant.
Yeah.
That's quite a radical thing to do. But then he eventually did drink himself to death, and he was a pilot for a while for TWA. But the thing that was the contempt, which is defensive, because Donald Trump wished he had the name Fred, and he wished he was always wanted to be his father's favorite. And also, so they used contempt by saying that pilots are no different from bus drivers. That was their contempt, which was really contempt for pilots and bus drivers, actually.
And he eventually bought an airline that failed.
And he bought an airline to own it rather than deal with his envy of his older brother.
Wow.
All of these things are about envy. And one of the things in my book that's a lot is about Trump's envy of other people. And there's a very short path from narcissism to envy.
Yeah.
They're very closely related because narcissism is a compensatory character flaw. It's compensating for feeling envious of other people. So you make yourself the greatest person who doesn't have anybody to envy.
Right.
And you compensate for not feeling loved by becoming grandiose as a way of really being strong and powerful. And I think that Trump was all of those things. Mary Trump's book is going to be quite a sensation, I think.
Yeah.
And we'll have to wait and see what it says, but it's a gutsy thing to do, I think.
Definitely. And then you write in Trump on the Couch, which again I recommend everybody read. You know, it almost makes you feel sorry for Trump, but almost being the operative word there. That his desire to have a father figure. You write about his, the upset that he felt, the sort of trauma of the father passing away, and his pursuit of this kind of a father figure. You mentioned that that's why he's attracted to people like Steve Bannon and Michael Cohen and even Emmanuel Macron, who's, sort of macho and got himself together more than Trump. You don't mention Putin in here, because I've always seen Putin as Donald Trump's sort of fake father. Like he worships this man in a weird, creepy way, but it is almost like paternal.
I didn't mention Putin overtly in there, but I have to say in the introduction, I made a comment that this is probably not the first portrait of Donald Trump psychologically, but I don't read Russian, so I'm not sure. But basically, yes, Putin would be one, and he likes Erdogan from Turkey, and he likes the guy from the Philippines. He likes strong dictator type people because yearning for a strong father, as much as he hated his father and was afraid of his father, he wanted to be like his father. So he treats a lot of us people in this country the way he felt his father treated him. So he is a bit tyrannical with the rest of us in a way that's really quite disturbing and anxiety provoking for us.
Yeah.
Us poor Americans here.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about his relationship to and his almost obsessive hatred of Barack Obama. I likened it to he's the Joker and Barack Obama's Batman. It's that obsessive in my book.
I read that. I thought that was very clever what you wrote in your book, and I like that a lot, that image. I have a feeling that it's more profound. Trump is fundamentally two things. One is he's a racist, and that's very important. So he can't stand. I mean, the fact is that the mistake Obama made was that he was president while being black.
Yeah.
And that was his big error. The second thing, though, about Trump is that he envies people who are loved. And he can't stand people who are loved more than him. That's where the narcissism and envy really mix together.
Yeah.
And he couldn't stand it. So and one of the things about envy, that when it's really unanalyzed and not worked on, when you are that envious, you spoil the good, because you can't stand the fact that something good comes from someone other than yourself. So he says, I will fix it. I can fix everything. He can't stand the idea that something good came from Obama. So he has to destroy every single act that Obama made, including allowing water in Flint, Michigan to be poisoned again, including allowing fracking, including supporting the oil industry, really dismantling almost the EPA. All of those things are unconsciously, if not consciously, attacks on Obama. But what's unconscious is his profound envy. I think he's more aware of his racism than he is of his envy.
Do you know, a lot of people, including Tony Schwartz and others, have brought up the fact that they aren't sure Donald Trump will ever leave office, that he might try to pull a Putin and stay. This has become a mainstream question people are asking. There, even members of Congress were saying, I don't know if this guy will go. Joe Biden has brought it up. Do you believe that, having analyzed him and taken this deep of a dive into his psychology, that he will leave office?
Yes, I think he will leave, and he'll leave right on time. But I don't know what he will do about tweeting and about his followers after he leaves. And I don't know what kind of a fuss he will kick up after he leaves. I don't think he will. I mean, he may contest the election saying, I'm leaving because it's rigged.
Yeah.
But the issue is really twofold. One is whether he will leave, and I think he will. But the second is that you wrote in one of your titles of one of your chapters, we talked about a cultural civil war.
Yeah.
This is a man who is promoting a cultural civil war. And I think he can continue to promote that out of office.
Absolutely.
And people are going to have their hands full, Biden and whoever his vice president is, and everybody who takes over is going to have their hands full, because Trump does have a lot of followers who are armed, who are Second Amendment freaks, and who are scary.
Yeah, and that are fanatical. I mean, almost I would love for you to write Trump's followers on the couch, because it is amazing.
Well, that's what I'm working on. That's my current project. It's called the Psychoanalysis of Followership.
Yeah, because he isn't impressive. He wasn't good at business. He wasn't really successful. It's not even clear he was a billionaire, really. He needed foreign help to get elected. It isn't clear what about him is so attractive to these people, but they are fanatical supporters.
Well, I think there are two things that are attractive, if I may say. One of them is that he was able on television in The Apprentice to fire people. And people felt that he was very forceful, and they worshiped him. I never watched The Apprentice once. So I didn't even know about it until I started working on the book and then started watching it. But I have friends and all kinds of people I know who watched it religiously every week, and they all voted for Trump.
You know what's so funny? I know so many people who watched The Apprentice who didn't vote for Trump, but black people
good
watched
for you.
it.
I'm glad about that, because it made me very freaked out.
Yeah, they watched it fanatically. I never watched it either. I found the idea of watching Donald Trump do anything to be ridiculous. I would, because of Central Park 5, I was not interested in watching that show at all.
That's right. No, but there were two things about The Apprentice, because the other thing was that when he watched The Apprentice, he actually was, I don't know what the right word is, confused, in that he actually thought he was watching himself.
Yeah.
He had the same name. He looked like Donald Trump, but he didn't realize that he was actually watching an actor reading a script.
Right.
So he actually believed that that's who he was.
Yeah.
And watching that for 11 years made him really believe that he was much stronger than he was. So that's the first thing about The Apprentice that's very important. And I think that his strength was that he convinced people that he could say, you're fired.
Yes.
And that allowed a lot of people who were discontented, he could help people who felt narcissistically injured, who felt that they didn't get what they were promised by previous politicians, who felt that some of them were God-fearing, hardworking Christian people who went to church and weren't getting ahead in the world and were having a hard time. And he said, I believe in breaking things. I'm a rich man, I will make it better. And he imprinted on them in such a way that they will follow him wherever he leads. He imprinted them at a very primitive, what I call emotionally primitive, basic level.
Yeah.
It's like when we were children, we can remember, let's say we had parents, hopefully, and when they would go out, we would cry and be mad, and how can they go out and leave us? You know, it's like the end of the world. We put on an act. But if you've been seriously injured and neglected or feel that you really weren't loved, Donald Trump, who wasn't loved, can tap into that feeling. And that has created a very powerful following, and they are like a cult.
I definitely need to read this book. When is this book coming out? We're gonna have to
the followership book. I don't know. I'm working on it, but who knows?
And in this book, though, in Trump on the Couch, you go through his sexism, his misogyny, his almost terror of strong women. They really seem to throw him off completely. Talk about that a bit.
And again, sexism and misogyny is defensive. He uses a defensive use of hatred and contempt to deny his real visceral fear of women and his fear of their power and his hatred of them, because he is unable to restrain himself when he sees sexy young women, but he feels that every other woman or most women can see through him and see what a defective human being he is. So he constantly has to promote himself as this great womanizer. I could have had this or that woman. But his misogyny is turning all women into one thing, and that has to do with his hatred. One of the final bottom lines that is important in this book is that he is a person who is stuck in a world of binary thinking. People are just good or bad. People are with you or against you, sort of like George Bush felt, only on steroids. And all of the things you describe in your book about the different aspects of him have one thing in common, which is that it's an either-or way of thinking. It's win or lose. That's it. That's why he can't make treaties, because treaties mean giving things up. He can't agree with things. He's like Oscar Levant. I don't know if you know him, but he was a very funny man who said that politicians are the kind of people who will double cross a bridge when they get to it. I think that's Trump.
He sounds, as you describe him, he is exactly the opposite of what you would want in a president of any country.
Exactly the opposite.
He's
yes.
perfect for a king, though, if that's what you want.
Because you don't contain. You don't hold people.
Yeah, he's such a strange person. Do you feel? What is your feeling about him? I mean, I don't know if you're if as an analyst, as a scientist, or as a clinician, if you have a sort of an attitude toward people, do you feel sorry for him?
No, because he's so sadistic and cruel. It's very hard to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
He really enjoys inflicting pain, separating children from their mothers at the border. There's no way to feel sorry for a person who does that. It's really hard to.
And this worship of the Confederacy it's crazy.
Support for the Confederacy is another thing that's crazy. But he's supporting what he sees as white victims, and white people are now the victims. I think that it's very tough because he has been such a binary thinker that he does what is called splitting. When you're a child, you split your world into good and bad internally because there's so many feelings and thoughts and confusing things. So you make things good and bad, and you have parents who help you with this. But when you get older, you really are more able to see complexity, and you can realize that you may love and hate the same person. That's called ambivalence. That's what we call it. It's part of being human. But Trump is really stuck in that either or phase of development. And our culture is a lot of that too. Part of our racism in this country, part of lots of things are about the temptation to split and just see things monolithically. That's why this COVID thing is so connected to Black Lives Matter in a real positive way, because now there's nobody to attack outside of the United States. And a lot of people are coming together in a way that's really fabulous. It's like the Jefferson Airplane song, Up Against the Wall, when they sang in 1965, tear down the walls so we can be together. And black and white are being together for the first time in my lifetime in a real serious way.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening. And it's so ironic that Trump is stuck in a White House surrounded by a black fence. Yeah. Of his own making.
I mean, with Stephen Miller, who he needs a book of his own because, wow, I mean, a Jewish guy who's an alt-right, which is
I got sick. I got sick enough writing the Trump book. Could never do Stephen Miller.
He is bizarre. Well, and I have to say, even Jared Kushner. I mean, Donald Trump's attitude toward Jewish people. To then, that's his son. His son-in-law is Jewish. It is so. All of it is so strange. It's also strange.
It's strange. And you said you like the George Bush book. Yeah. One of the quotes I had in the George Bush book applies to Donald Trump. Maybe it applies to all of us, which was that I used a little epigram by Montaigne, who said, "We are more unlike ourselves than we are unlike others."
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And in Donald Trump's case, he also married Donald Trump, because people try to say, "Oh, free Melania," she is Donald Trump. She's just like him. I don't see how she's any different. She's very similar.
Yep. So psychologically, they're very similar and just as ruthless.
Yeah, it is an interesting book. I'm gonna my final question to you, my exit question is, and this is, again, I'm not asking you to diagnose him on what to read, but Donald Trump's father died of Alzheimer's, and everyone knows that he had it, and he got it at about the same age Donald Trump is now. Do you see in Donald Trump's wavering? There's the ramp gate where he couldn't seem to navigate a ramp. He couldn't drink a glass of water without a second hand helping him. Does he show signs of the kind of deterioration that his father succumbed to?
He has some signs of deterioration that are like his father's. One of them was even earlier, which you noticed early on when he would go off script. His vocabulary has become more and more limited over time, even in the last 3 years or 4 years. I do think that he has trouble remembering things, but I also think that one of the things that happens with people who have early dementia is that when they're angry, they become extremely organized. And when he gets angry at some of the press, you even put some of this in your book, he talks them, he just lays them out cold.
Yeah.
And tells them to shut up and is very powerful. And so that's one of the things that you see sometimes with people who are beginning to slip into a demented state. But for me, I don't want to make a diagnosis as much as he needs to have a diagnosis.
Yes.
He needs to be evaluated. He needs to have a psychiatric evaluation that's thorough, but he also needs a neurological evaluation that's thorough.
And for all we know, he's gotten it, and they just aren't telling us. Trump on the couch.
So Now, I was going to say that if you want a diagnosis, all I can say is he's Donald Trump. That's my final diagnosis.
And there you have it. Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President by Justin A. Frank, MD. You will want to read this book, and you should then also read Bush on the Couch and compare them. Because right as I'm reading through your book, I'm comparing it to George W. Bush. They have very different psychologies, but fascinating work. Thank you so much for being here, Justin A. Frank, MD.
Thank you.
You're great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Thank y'all for watching. This is so much fun and listening. And we got to, also account for the listeners only, people who are watching who are enjoying this without the visual. So thank you all for listening and watching. Trump on the Couch. Thank you, Justin A. Frank, MD, Dr. Frank. This is one of the most interesting people in the world. He also did write one on Obama. So if you want to read Obama on the Couch, you can also pick that up. He's done He's done an on the couch, and he's a clinical psychiatrist, so he's an expert, and he's done one of these on most of the modern presidents, or all of the modern presidents. So you definitely want to check it out, because the psychology of the kind of person who becomes president is a fascinating question. What in your mind makes you think I ought to be the leader of the free world? I ought to run the entire United States. There is something about that psychology, and one of the things that a lot of them share are daddy issues, are issues with their fathers, whether it's Bill Clinton, who had the drunk stepdad who he had to defend his mother from so he wouldn't beat her, whether it's Barack Obama, who had the absentee African father who's never around. I can relate to that directly. I relate to Obama's problem because he had one of those kind of dads like I did. Or whether it's Trump, who had this like cruel, mean, cheating on his taxes, went to a Klan rally father. There's a whole lot in the psychology of these guys, all of them, I think, who become president of the United States. So I want to thank Justin Frank for being here. We're going to get him on to AM Joy too, because he's really fascinating and he's interesting. And the illustrations on the book are classic. I love the illustrations. I mean, they're always quite good. So thank you very much to that. Lots and lots of Joan Baez gave him a blurb. That's pretty deep. We had a blurb from Joan Baez. So thank you to Justin Frank. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you on another What to Read, REID. Always spell it right. Please give us some comments. I am really waiting and very excited to know what you guys thought of this interview. So please throw some comments down under the little section right there below. You can throw some comments in. You can hit that little button, the little alarm bell, which means that you will never miss another episode of What to Read. You don't want to miss it, because we've got some good ones coming up. We have some fascinating people coming up that I'm going to be interviewing here. And also, please share. Send this to everybody you know, because they all want to know what is going on with this dude. So please share. And also, what else do you got to do? We got to big up all our people who are listening on Spotify. Thank you to all of our Spotify listeners. We're working on you, Apple iTunes people. We see you. We love you. We're going to make it work for everybody. So everybody, we'll see you on the next What to Read. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome, Joe.
All right, see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye, fam.